Hello everyone, in this video inshallah we'll talk about chapter 1 in our story, The Red-Headed League. So we'll learn about author of the story, London in the 19th century. What does the story talk about? So let's get started with the first reading word. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was born in Edinburgh, UK. He studied to be a doctor, but he also liked writing stories. After university, he became a doctor and a writer. He wrote stories about books about history. Conan Doyle is famous for the character he invented called Sherlock Holmes. He wrote a study in Scarlet in 1887. It was the first of 60 stories about Sherlock Holmes, a detective who lived at 221 Baker Street in London in the 80s. He solved lots of crimes and mysteries with his friend Watson. These stories were very popular and many people believed that Sherlock Holmes was the real person. London. Okay. The Red-Headed League is one of 12 short stories in a book called The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. They are about London at the end of the 19th century. At that time, England was becoming a rich country. More people were living in cities, but many people were poor, so there was a lot of crime. Dr. Joseph Bell, Doyle's professor at university, gave Doyle the idea for Sherlock Holmes. Dr. Bell could work out information about his patients by observing them. Sherlock Holmes deduced information about crimes in the same way. So let's get started with the first reading word of our story. One day, Dr. Watson visited his friend Sherlock Holmes at his home in London. When he arrived, Sherlock Holmes was taken to a man in his living room. The man's name was Mr. James Wilson. Mr. Wilson knew that Holmes was a famous detective who could solve crimes, and he wanted him to solve a mystery. While Mr. Wilson was talking, Holmes looked at him carefully. He looked at Mr. Wilson's face, his hands, and his clothes. He worked it out that Mr. Wilson used to be a laborer, that he visited China in the past, and that he did a lot of writing. When Sherlock Holmes told Mr. Wilson this information, he was very surprised because everything Sherlock Holmes said was true. Mr. Wilson decided that Holmes must be a wonderful detective. Mr. Watson started telling Holmes his story. He had a small shop in London where he worked with his assistant Vincent Spaulding. Not many people visited Mr. Wilson's shop, and he wasn't a rich man. One day, Mr. Spaulding showed him an advert in the newspaper for a job with the Red-Headed League. The Red-Headed League found jobs for men with red hair. Mr. Spaulding wanted Mr. Wilson to ask about the job because Mr. Wilson had red hair and the job was only a few hours a week. The money could really help Mr. Wilson and his small shop. That afternoon, Mr. Spaulding took Mr. Wilson to the Red-Headed League. There were a lot of men waiting outside the office, and they all had red hair. But Mr. Spaulding pushed past all the men until they were outside the door. They went inside and met the manager, Dr. Johnson Ross, who told them about the job. The person who got the job would have to come to the office every day between 10 and 2 o'clock. He wouldn't be able to leave the office during this time. While he was in the office, he would have to copy all the information from a large encyclopedia into a book. The pay was for a week. This was a lot of money. Mr. Ross told Mr. Wilson that if he could start work the next day, he could have the job. Mr. Wilson was very surprised, but quickly said yes. And we finished the reading word for this chapter. Now we have the word time. detective مخبر أو بوليس سري أو محقق. solve يحل. crimes جرائم. mysteries ألغاز. carefully بحرص. workout يستنتج. labor عامل. past ماضي. surprise مندهش. true حقيقي. decide يقرر. wonderful رائع. advert إعلان. push past يدفع للأمام. encyclopedia موسوعة. And now we have the abstract of our chapter. We finished about author of the story, London in the 19th century. What did the story talk about? We finished them all. And now you can answer some questions with me. Who was Dr. Watson? Good, he was Sherlock Holmes' friend. How did Holmes look at Mr. Wilson? So easy. Perfect. He looked carefully at his face, hands, and clothes. What did Mr. Wilson decide after Holmes told him that true information? Just focus. Very good. He decided that Holmes must be a wonderful detective and started telling him his story. Who was Mr. Spaulding? Focus. Perfect. He was Mr. Wilson's assistant in his small shop. Why was the job very important for Mr. Wilson? Because he was an artsman, simply. Who was the manager of the Red-Headed League? Perfect! Dr. Johnson Ross. And now you can test yourself with these questions. You can take a screenshot from the video and answer them, and you can contact us. And now we finished with Nafham. You can learn more easier. And remember, you can join Nafham live and contact your teachers obviously. Goodbye.